Morning, Reisz. Morning, Dries.
Good morning, Ali.
Morning.
Nice to see you both again.
And yourself.
Likewise, yes.
Yeah. So, just for a bit of context, for everyone listening, watching, the three of us were asked to come together to speak and discuss around the question of diversity in the arts, both from an organizational point of view, how organizations are tackling this, but also as artists working in the sector. And this is also following on from a discussion we had on Monday, and it's a pre-recorded discussion. And after our chat on Monday, we felt it'd be nice to continue this with a little follow-up, a coda, with anything remaining, and have that time reflection in between Monday and now. So we're just going to go around, do some intros to everyone. Reisz, would you like to begin?
Yeah, sure. So my name's Reisz Amos. I am currently the artistic associate at Birmingham Opera Company. Prior to that, I was a freelance theatre director, singer-songwriter and composer, earning my stay really more in the compositional side of theatre and film. Yeah, that's a little bit about me, really. I think that's quite brief, but it says everything.
Dries?
So I'm Dries Douibi. I'm currently part of a shared direction in Kunst Festival des Arts, which is a festival based in Brussels, a festival which happens every year in May, and it's an international performing arts festival. And before that, so in the constellation and my function within the festival is more of an artistic direction, but I also share the general direction. And we also currently rethinking our mode of organizing our organization. So this is also in development and in evolution. And before that, I was a performing arts programmer in Birmingham, which is a theater also in Brussels.
Okay, thank you, Dries. So my name's Annie Poyling-Locke. I've been working for a while as an independent dance artist. Mainly I work as a choreographer, a performer and a teacher. And very recently, since April, I started the role of co-artistic director alongside freelance curator and producer Cat Bridge at the Siobhan Davies Studios in London, which is an organisation that supports experimental and contemporary dance practices. And similar to you, Dries, we're in a co-directorship, and we are in a process of looking at logistics and ways to work. So in view of this discussion and in view of diversity in the arts, there was something that came up in a chat I was having yesterday about how a lot of this, there's the ideology, but then there's also how this then manifests in logistics and practicalities. And it's in these details that we see where that integrity lies. So is anything left over from Monday?
I have maybe something like, no, because somehow what I found really interesting and also interesting in the work and which left with me on Monday, also by both of your testimonies and input, is this balance between individual, particular, singular experience, and that every, and also recognizing and not like going against homogenization, and then also these very powerful testimonies of how it is for the two of you to work in your current organizations, which have a history of being, let's say, less inclusive and less diverse, not to say white institutions, and how important it's also to start from your own experiences to develop this kind of trajectory and to kind of and so I wanted to go back to something what was Reisz was saying. This still stays with me because it's also something that me as also being part of a direction bump into more on a structural level. Where actually I addressed it already the previous time, but somehow it's something that keeps on resonating, where as you were like describing, if I remember correctly, that there is this little voice in your head, but also the voices which maybe even not directly to you, but like the kind of the atmosphere in your environment of peers, of people of your community, but also people outside of your community, of where people are asking explicitly and implicitly, like, what are you doing in this organization? How come that you're part of this organization? And then you were like almost like voicing that there is also this voice in your head that there is this, I'm just part, not just, but I'm part of kind of positive action, and that's the only reason why I'm here, and kind of ignoring this rich kind of background and qualities and history that you have yourself. And so this is for me being also facing and thinking about my own organization, like indeed how to structure, like and then you spoke yourself that was kind of out of a personal emancipation, that you found the strength in yourself and the sense of how you say this, self-confidence to overcome this. But I was just more wondering on structural level, what could be put in place to, if there are people who, let's say, are part of an organization that was recently or still you are taking actually this role, or not taking this role, you're put in this role all of a sudden, that you are kind of that the rest of the organization is not reflecting your own identity, and you feel that this organization is maybe also in a good evolution, but still there is kind of a lot of there's a lot of things being projected onto you. So how, even if like you were, even like you were not recruited, or people are not recruited because of positive action, or maybe they are partly, but they're mostly recruited because of all their qualities, and because of also maybe they were not recruited before, not because there was not positive action, but because the organization was just not adapted, because the organization had blind spot, because not of because of the handicaps of the organization, or the disability of the organization itself somehow. So I was just wondering, coming back to your personal story, how to reflect it more on a structural level also. It's also because I am, of course, busy with it, and these are questions that I'm dealing with, like how to tackle these insecurities, how to make it possible to discuss it, how to go against these taboos, which are very difficult things to pinpoint on that. Sometimes it's explicit, but often it's about kind of atmosphere, how your colleagues look at you, or how they deal with you, and how they take you serious or not serious.
Yeah, that's an absolutely fantastic question. I think one of the things that as soon as you were talking, I thought to myself, well, if it was an advertisement and they were looking for a blonde woman to play a specific role, you'd expect to walk into the room and see 16, 17, 18, 19 blonde women. But then what you would do personally is say, okay, what sets me apart from the other blonde women? Although the category is still just blonde women, right? So you'd literally be saying, well, she's blonde and blue-eyed. Maybe they want blonde and blue. So you start adding caveats now, right? And this is the personal experience. But from a systemic perspective, the only way that can feel, for want of a better word, cushioned or more comfortable, or supported is a good word for that. The only way that we can support some of those natural insecurities that are going to happen, irrespective of whether it's race, whether it's gender, sexuality, whatever, sexual orientation, whatever it is always going to be in the interview process. It's always going to be in that period of time when you haven't got the job yet, when you're now trying to understand the organization, factor in to your conversations, not just what you want that person's role to be, but also discussion about the general ethos of the organization and how that can some way shape the artistic development of the person you're trying to bring in as well. So my thing has always been, I have to buy into that whole thing, irrespective of the blockades that may be in front of me once I'm invested into it. I think the pulling power for me, especially in my organization, was I believe in what this organization is trying to do. So then it became a very, very separate thing. Although they're not separate from an external perspective, but for me internally, in the sense of my decisions, I was very happy with the decision I'd made to invest in the organization first. So then when I had to go in and go, oh gosh, right, okay, diversity, inclusion, boom, 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 I didn't couple it. So then it was easy for me to kind of go, oh, maybe it's not affirmative action. So separating what would be a systemic issue and what was a personal issue, again, going back to the blonde example, I can have those conversations with myself, my partner, whatever, my mom, whoever I need to, and go back and go, guys, I'm struggling with X, Y, and Z. But the question always had to be, was I invested in what the organization was trying to do? I think wraparound conversations in interviews, changing interview style from, what do you bring to the table, and sort of how do you see XYZ going, or having this conversation almost similar to what we're doing now, where there's a push and there's a pull, where there's a tell. It's not just tell me something about you and I'm sitting there thinking, right, I know they need to hear that I've been a theatre director, I know they need to hear that I've been a composer. Like genuinely having this push and pull, so that you feel as though actually what I've just come from is a discussion where we were all trying to get to know each other. Because sometimes it's very good to employ somebody based on their skill, but in the day and age that we live in, skill can be taught, character can't. And I think one of the biggest issues when it comes to things like looking at affirmative action and things like that, and filling quotas and ticking boxes, is that we look for the person who's very, very specified in that skill, because we know our outcomes and our outputs are based on making sure that funder can see that we've done that, and that person can see that we've done that. But actually getting a sense of character actually informs to me how you're going to apply the skill. So for instance, in my interview, we had a very generic conversation, and I felt comfortable enough to turn around and go, admin is really not my forte, you know. Do you know what I mean? Whereas if I didn't feel that comfortable in that conversation, I would never have admitted that, and I would have panicked every time it came to an administrative task. Do you see what I mean? So I think having an inclusive process at the very, very start that allows the person, irrespective of all the, as we said, all the differences and the challenges that they may be personally facing, if that person then is just invested in the thing that you do, then their eye is on the vision. And then we may then have to look at tackling the other issues again, though, as you're adding these thought processes into your better practice. It's good then to have those things up front in the conversation. Look, I'm going to be totally honest with you. We as an organization have really, really struggled with diversity and inclusivity. And I don't want you to feel as though we're only bringing you in because you fill the black quota. In actual fact, what we need is quality black representation that teaches us something. Now I feel as though I can show the organization something. Do you see what I mean? Open, and it's literally just taking the lid off that conversation. It's literally maybe having your interview process or whatever over a coffee. As opposed to, right, you know, you come into the office and you sit down, you know, all that feeling. Maybe I tell you what we're going to do. We're going to have a lunch conversation, and you know, on the organization, 2 or 3 people go out for lunch, and this person comes and meets for lunch. First thing you do is, right, do you like cheese or not? Do you know what I mean? And it feels so different. You've set a completely new atmosphere, and we'll just sit down and we'll push and we'll pull. Now, you know that critically you're making some decisions internally. But actually, just sitting there, and you never know, you may have just met a nice person who down the line, maybe not right for the job, but may be able to have an input into whatever is the wider scope of what you're trying to achieve. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Sorry, I went on for a little bit then, and it kind of caught me, but yeah.
No, it makes a lot of sense, yes.
It's interesting what you say about interview strategies and just the whole protocols, because the point of a lot of this is like going back to this idea of how does ideology manifest in, and the ethics manifest in the tiny details of logistics and how things are practically applied.
Absolutely.
So it makes me think about a lot of narratives that get generated around blaming and guilt and feeling like the injured or the victim within this, and not saying that those feelings aren't valid and don't exist, but there can often be a reduction of these narratives, and then a perpetration of a kind of lack of information being shared, and therefore the difficulty in things moving on. So it makes me think about not even informalizing situations, but humanizing these situations.
Yeah, that's it.
Fees or not humanizes that, then that's great. Not that that whole structure can't be really also really focused and really professional, but that there is humanizing. And I think there's, having been on the other side of things for so long now, being the artist vying for funding, vying for a commission, vying for a teaching post or anything, and always not often feeling met. Often feeling that I have to prove something, as opposed to feeling like you're amazing, you're going to give us something. Can we support a variety of things you're going to bring, as opposed to you're not quite the fit for us, but you're not quite the fit, but that's really exciting. How might we adapt or flex to welcome that? I feel like that's hardly ever happened.
Yeah.
You know, probably a bit though. And I think that's something to be said about then staying within the independent project realm, where you're much more likely to find more creativity in how to work. Now I'm getting a glimpse into the organizational side of things. There's been a big focus and energy going into how we write an email.
There's a shift, language shift,
tonal shift, and it's tricky because we're not claiming to be a total horizontal leadership, but we are talking about a softer hierarchy, you know, but still leading and taking responsibility for the things that we're leading on, and that we're
absolutely. We hear consistently. Yes, I agree. I think we hear consistently you know, narratives like I'm not here to make friends, you know, it's a work colleague and so on and so forth. And I do understand, you know, there are boundaries that you can put in place, but I do believe in the day and age that we live in, if there isn't relationship there in some way, shape or form, then it's always destined to fail. Because as you said, Annie, perfectly, this is about humanization. What is the human intent behind our decision making and what we do? Of course, it's very, very hard when you're caught up in bureaucracy and red tape, and there are things that you've got to do. And it's always good to have somebody in the organization who maybe who thinks a lot more critically than somebody else or whatever. Not that doesn't mean that they have to be dehumanized. So I always say this in things like when we talk about race and equality and diversity, I always say, number one, figure out whether you're talking about equality or equity. Because we often use the word equality meaning equity and not know the difference between the two, and that's a big issue. And I say that back to my own community. You're constantly fighting for equality, but you don't know what equality looks like because you don't understand what equity is, right? That's number one. Another thing to me is I always say being pro-black doesn't make me anti-white. So being pro something doesn't automatically make you anti something. So in keeping that as just a human condition, it's nice to be able to go into an environment where I'm like, I'm very pro-black, but that doesn't mean I look at the white man as the devil, or you know, as consistently against me. Or I understand that there are systems that are built that do that, but so now if every person of color, if everybody who has a difference that isn't celebrated is standing on the outside of the system looking in, you've now got to wonder, how long is it going to work shouting to break the door down if nobody goes in through the crack of the door that's open? You have to have somebody that is prepared to go on the inside, not as a spy, not as somebody who's come to set destruction, not as a virus to plant some sort of nasty disease and let it spread, but there's someone who can turn around and go, actually, guys, you know what? There's a bit of space in here for us and we can make that bigger. There's a couple of people on the inside here who are really willing to work with us. Do you see what I mean? And often it comes with the negative connotation, consistently doesn't it? And it looks like from the outside in, everyone's kind of going, oh, they don't do that, they don't do that, they don't do that. Okay, well, we need people to step up and step in. And we also need people exactly like yourself, Dries, to kind of turn around and go, we don't know. So actually, actually, Annie, can you come and show us, teach us? There's something for us to learn there. Actually, can you upskill our staff? Is there a way that we can do a workshop or a couple of workshops, and we'll pay you for your time to upskill our staff about certain cultural things that we should be looking for, or certain inclusivity and diversity factors that we maybe have overlooked, or even just little things like the culture in Brussels is going to be completely different to the culture in Birmingham, irrespective of the people that exist within that. And I think that's another way to look at things as well. Do we do enough upskilling? Do we do enough sharing? All right then, Annie. We're trying to work with the Chinese community. It'd be fantastic if you could actually come in and talk to me about the things that I should be looking out for. Do you know what I mean? Because I don't want to go in there ignorant. And the 1 and 2 things that I presume to know about Chinese culture, put it out, and everybody's looking at you like, that was a bit of appropriation there, wasn't it, Reisz? Do you see what I mean?
Fine, Reisz. You like martial arts?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, of course.
You have already a link.
It was so funny, actually, when you mentioned that, Reisz, on Monday, because both you were saying that and also not knowing you very well, I was kind of like in this very pending kind of place of, is he saying that's enough? Or is he saying that's not enough? And it was really interesting where that then went, and
Absolutely, I can understand that completely,
because I've just been there so many times, and it's true, it has been such a connecting point, a real connecting point, actually, martial arts for me with many people as well.
Of course. So, and that's the thing, you can't take away from the fact that it is a thing, but I found it. And again, a caveat and a disclaimer: it wasn't somebody from my organization that said that, so I don't want to sort of throw anybody under the bus. But for me, it was one of those things where it was far from enough. Yeah. But it was a trigger point.
I guess what threw me though was because not knowing you very well, but also hearing how you'd spoken already.
Yeah,
it was a given for me that someone like yourself could enter the Chinese community. Just you know what I mean, with your thinking and your
that's a testament to your open mind then, isn't it? Because doesn't that
I wouldn't necessarily be welcomed, because what you say, just being Chinese, being black doesn't make you welcome into the so-called same communities, and but there's a question, I don't know whether my brain can take me back there. Around training and upskilling. And as you were talking, because I have this big kind of like aversion to what I feel is a bit of a kind of spa environment to learn about these things, and until you've got actual real situations to apply them to and to use them in, it sits as just quite a nice session with a really brilliant facilitator that makes you really feel okay about everything, and that you've learned stuff and you've taken notes and you've got a list of things to action. But the point is it is in each moment, isn't it? So then I had a question to you both around that. What is that balance of, or what is not a conclusive answer? What has your experience been of that balance of working with actual real situations where diversity is there in front of you, against this upskilling training for the organization, which might predominantly be white, or so at what point do these things enter usefully to be applied? And then you said, Reisz, about what if I talk to Annie, because I know I'm going to go into the Chinese Community Centre, and I might go, I don't know anything about that Chinese Community Centre, but maybe you should talk to this, or maybe I could talk to that person that will then, and then what often happens is a breakdown in steps, actually. It's never just, okay, that'll be a solution. So then you gave a concrete example of how to use that upskilling to apply to a direct, but can we be presented with that situation first somehow? Sometimes I think it's the other way around. It's like, let's do all this reading, let's do all this, and also there's all this expensive training with fantastic facilitators that actually give you lots of reading, but there's also lots of reading out there that is available and free, and and I wonder you know, I don't know, that it brings me back to financial responsibility and being a very small organization with a very limited budget and with quite a big asset of the building to actually run and make kind of functioning and work and turnover and things like that. You know, we've invested a lot in understanding where money goes, you know, and so if it is a £600 training, you know, I really want to understand how that sits inside the context of
Absolutely.
Of what needs to happen now, you know. So
absolutely.
Yeah.
Oh, interesting. What are your thoughts on that, Dries? Do you have that experience, especially in the festival?
It's a lot. It's a lot of questions at the same time. It's like a lasagna of questions, and I just feel like adding more questions instead of answering them. No, as in, just to. Oh no, sorry, Annie, you want to say something?
No, I do think it's great to keep adding questions as well.
Okay, yeah. For me, my it's also like personal experience. Some adding questions are also then a testimony in the sense that what I underestimated also. I share the same position as you, Annie, like leading an organization in the sense that what I underestimated is the which I knew already a bit, but it's different when you start then doing the actual job, is and the wide history of an organization, but also somehow like we were like in our position, it was very not easy, but it was very possible to really change the policy around hiring people, recruiting, and somehow in a very short term, on a lot of key positions in the organization, we were able to, in a very short time, to go transition in the sense that that we reflect as an organization more the complex demography of our own city. So that was successful in a way, with which I totally underestimated. And we also failed a bit, or failed. I don't know. It's even an open question yet. I didn't digest it completely, and that's also what I said. Like we did a lot of in the previous talk, like a lot of work on a lot of different directions. We also changed the composition of the team, but somehow, which I neglected a bit, was the working on the people that were already there. And actually the people who actually, like you, they say that they're pro-black, and even if they are themselves white, and they share kind of same kind of value system, but still they are super resistant in certain changes. Still there, so somehow and I think this is really like one of the like because somehow, which is interesting to see also, is that a lot of people from diverse backgrounds, let's say it like this, in all different ways, often their trajectories was already much more difficult to come where they are, with more obstacles. So somehow for them it's like, and I don't want to romanticize it at all, actually, it's also even a kind of sad reality. It's easier to flourish within the organization, while people who are already within the organization working there for years, it's difficult to have to challenge kind of status quo, to challenge the way how we've been working, to be confronted with racist behavior, so somehow this is kind of the things that we now have to work on. Is on the one hand, indeed, like we were saying, Reisz, supporting and trying to find structures of support of the people who arrive, whatever the background, but people who arrive in the organization, and make them flourish more, but also working even harder on deconstructing and having really strong anti-racist formations, and having kind of a culture where people belief systems are challenged. But this is a difficult one, or this is also, I mean, it was not completely your question, Annie, but this was somehow and what Reisz was saying and what you were saying, somehow this what was brought up with me.
No, I totally understand, and I do agree, because if we are very honest, the three of us belong to establishments that well outdate us, that have a way of being that has always just been. And so any change is always going to come up against adversity. And then you've got a generation of people who were born out of that very said adversity, who are trying to bring the very change that they're being resisted against by their so-called parents in the industry. And I think what we sometimes do, and it goes back to that conversation we had on Monday about setting up for the kids but not living it ourselves. If we take that a step backwards as well.
Mm.
There's a miscommunication back at this end. Something's missed in transition back at this end, isn't there? Whereby those who are meant to be handing the baton over don't really trust us. Or actually it's always been this way, and actually if I give you this thing, although I know you're skilled and equipped, you might run left and run wild. The biggest thing for me, and it may sound so mundane as a statement, is just the eradication of fear. It's just, what are you scared of on both sides? What are the things that you think are going to happen? What are the things that you think are not going to be catered for? What do you think that this change is going to do to this establishment that has existed? Dance, theatre, opera, these things will forever be. They forever were and forever will be, right? And they exist in a context to certain people in a way that is formulaic. So for instance, there's still parts of the industry that will not accept contemporary dance. That's fact. We know that. There are still parts of the industry that will not accept a black artist on stage in opera. That we know that as fact. There are still parts of the industry that will not really get down with the stories of the LGBTQ community in the theatre. We know that these obstacles are in place. So obviously it's going to take a representation of somebody from those communities to make those changes. However, this is where our issue comes from. If there is stubbornness here and stubbornness here, then there's always going to be a divergence, and there's always going to be a separation between the bringing of those things together. So the new is almost going to look like you're trying to set up a new establishment and not build upon the establishment that already exists. So what that actually takes is people with an understanding of why people have the prejudices in the first place. It doesn't mean you have to agree. And I think this is another thing as well. And that's why I mean eradicating fear. Understanding something doesn't mean that you have to agree with something. And I think if we as a people can get over that discomfort of going, no, I totally disagree with you, Dries, but we can still go for a coffee. It's that weird thing that when people disagree, all of a sudden now you're factioned into enemy sectors, right? As a black man, I've had to understand not only the plight of black people, but also the reason why there may have been an issue on the white side. I've had to come to terms with the fact that, and people probably shoot me down for saying it, at some stage, there had to have been a black man involved with the selling of a black man at some stage. I don't know what happened there or how that conversation went down or what kind of brainwash, but there's different things along the route that I've had to understand. Now, understanding doesn't mean excuse. So that now puts me in a position where I can go on the inside of industry and go, okay, you're asking me these questions, but I don't have to be defensive because I'm trying to look at the wider scope. Okay, that was very ignorant on your part, but there are ignorances on my part. If I can't bring my community in, there's obviously something, a barrier in between us. And these are the things that I'm talking about in the sense of these barriers can only be bridged by somebody who understands what's on that side and that side. Okay. And and again, I have to reiterate, it's not about excusing behaviors, but it's also that same respect and reverence that you would give to your grandparents who wants to sit down and talk to you about how it was back in their day. You don't disrespect them by saying, shut up, it's different now, do you? No, you take on what they've said and you've gone, oh gosh, that must have been really difficult. And you know what, now that reminds me of, and all of a sudden you've built a correlation. That reminds me of when I went to school. And of course, my school experience is not going to be the same school experience as my nan's experience, but I've drawn a line where she can go, oh God, yeah, my grandson really understands where I'm coming from. And it's all in the language and it's all in the eradication of fear. And it's a semblance of the village. And you hear this used 1,000 times over, but it is a semblance of the village. The elders are meant to teach, and the new generation are meant to run with it. And it's that. So when you can create that sharing, Annie, that goes back to your point of the upskilling thing should not just be a sit-down session where somebody comes in and says, this is how you should treat black people, and this is how you should treat gay and lesbian community. And it should never be that. It should feel so open and inclusive. And you know, I mean, in my world, this is because I'm a nutter. I see music, I see dance, I see, okay, come in and understand. Let's share. Then we're comfortable. So fear is eradicated. Yeah, make a fool of yourself, because I'll make a fool of myself as well. We'll dance and we'll eat and I'll bring in some and then it'll be a case of, okay, cool. Now that you feel comfortable, can you explain to me why you didn't feel comfortable? Rather than coming in at the point where it's like, I know you're uncomfortable, let me deal with that. Don't deal with the discomfort from a place of discomfort. We have to deal with discomfort after the eradication of fear. Now we're comfortable. So even in this conversation alone, Annie, you mentioned it and you put it so poignantly, when I mentioned the Kung Fu thing. Actually, you had to give yourself a moment where you were like, is he saying enough? And what was the one thing that let you know what my mindset was? It was once we'd built a relationship. Once you saw how I continue in the conversation, once we'd continue to sort of pull things apart, you were like, oh yeah, well, I know his mentality. Do you see what I mean? And sometimes going in cold and, hiring a group of people that I've heard they do great work, and they come in and there's this sort of, these guys are going to lead this workshop and you're sat there and it's like, okay, cool. And then they give you these little tasks to go and do. It should be a celebration. It should be a mini festival in itself. So you don't feel as though you are being shoved into a corner and forced to learn something about something that you probably, half of the people in there probably don't really care about learning, really, in a sense of taking on the information in that way. A lot of us, especially in the creative world, we learn kinesthetically, don't we? We learn by sharing and pulling and doing. And so why not take the very industry that we are in? Sometimes I wonder why there's never artistic responses to some of the situations that have happened from people who are creatives first. Yes, I know we may have different roles, and you guys, as leaders of organizations, have to sort of think so far. But do you ever feel like, oh God, I feel like I'm just walking one step further every day away from the very reason why I came to do this thing? There has to be a creative response. So if we're going to be sharing, if we're going to be upskilling, if we're going to be embracing culture, sexual orientation, if we're going to be let's do it as a celebration, because nobody feels ostracized at a celebration. So turning it on its head and doing it in a way where we'll get to the formalities, but for now, let's enjoy each other, right? May shift the dichotomy somewhat, a little bit, so that when you eradicate the formality, you dispel some of the fears and the apprehensions, and you run a little mini festival that is actually you hitting a KPI of making sure there's a piece of training in place. But the people who are going to be leading this mini festival exist in the communities that you're trying to bring into your organization. Does that make sense? Or is that like me just being wildly spurious? Because it can be like that sometimes, but it's the way I see it shaped in my head.
It makes me think again about how these trainings are shaped. And actually, I haven't done any. I haven't done any of these, formal, expensive trainings, and I know there's judgment in there. But there's but I do question how these types of trainings have been constructed, under what kind of systems, under what kind of rules. And yeah, there's homework, or there's reading to do, there's discussion, there's note taking, there's, how about someone kind of witnessing how a day in the life of, and then having real practical, I mean, I'm sure some people do that, but a day in the life of, and then you've got real actual things to talk about, real actual actions, habits to look at, and but then it also makes me think of the other end of the spectrum. Take it out of the office environment, take it out of that work environment.
1000%.
And what about, just this environment that allows people to exist together, whether that's sharing food or talking. And then it also brings me to neoliberalism and capitalism, and how it is absolutely inseparable from the patriarchy and the colonialism that we're all talking about here. And I refuse to say that any of these issues are isolated from these huge things, because fear, now Jenny Holzer talks about, the artist Jenny Holzer talks about fear being the most elegant weapon. And I think that is just so brilliantly put, because it is so elegant, we don't even know it's happening to us. But the reason why I bring all these capitalistic and neoliberalist structures back in is because we're constantly being fed a competitive and a fear and a scaremongering culture the way
Absolutely.
information is given to us, the way we're saturated, the way we're constantly distracted, the way we're losing focus, we're losing control, we're
Yeah.
losing, our ground, and there's so much manipulation going on,
Mm.
and we're distrustful. We are
Yeah.
distrustful, and then the pandemic and Brexit. I'm
Mm.
very, very aware of um, the propaganda around xenophobia
Yeah. Yeah.
that it then kind of supports, and then another thing is, Reisz, you mentioned the village and the grandparents, and I think another thing to remember around this kind of whole training and and what can we do or what can we learn is, it is like trying to change your grandparents' point of view or your parents' point of view. And if we think about it a bit more realistically than that,
Mm.
you can soften and you can
Absolutely.
mold things a bit by bringing
Mm.
that friend home that
Absolutely.
is different,
Mm.
and they get to meet that person and they get to see
Mm.
a real example from that. But if you just say no, you have to accept trans people, you
Yeah.
have to accept
Mm.
whatever, that ain't going to happen in the same way, is it? So
Absolutely.
again, it's like we need to approach this in a real slow burning, deeply invested way, and a constant way,
Yes.
and I think that parent, grandparent, kind of great grandparents, it's not, we can't just change them overnight. We
Yeah.
can't, imagine putting your parents in a one-off training, or
Yeah.
maybe a series of 6. That's not going to change,
Yeah, absolutely not. There does have to be an underbelly, and it's really interesting you say that, because I come from a theory that love and fear are opposites as opposed to love and hate. I find that hate is a byproduct of fear. So actually, the complete opposite of love for me is fear, and it's really interesting because it's only a thin blue line that separates the two. You only fear what you could potentially fall in love with,
Mm.
and you only fall in love with something that can actually be quite scary, because it's necessary to exist with a line of vulnerability. It all exists under a vulnerability line, and it's I very quickly I had a meeting with Carlos da Costa, the dance. He's now head of Birmingham Royal Ballet, isn't he? And so we were having a conversation, and he said to me, "Right, Reisz, if I got loads of tickets and gave your boys tickets to come and come and see the dance, would they come?" And I said, "No, they wouldn't, Carlos. They're not going to come." He's like, so what do I, bearing in mind, this is another black man. So when we're talking about inclusion and diversity, that very statement alone says he doesn't even know how to engage with a group of people from his own culture in a separate community. Right. So anyway, again, I digress. He said, he goes, so what do I need to do, Reisz? What do I need to do? And the man's charming like no one's business. And I've said, Carlos, you know what you need to do? You need to let me phone my boys up, and we'll all go for a night out. Let them see that you can dance in a nightclub. Not ballet, not classic, not just dance. They will respect you because you can just chill with them at the nightclub. And then maybe once we've gone for some drinks after that, you sit down and you go, but I'm trained in ballet, right? And allow that moment for everyone to go, what? But we just saw you doing your best Michael Jackson impression. That's not ballet, right?
Mm.
And then you go, I tell you what, if I can't convince you guys to come to a ballet, I've got a show coming on. You can all come in for free. Get your asses in. Let's see. Already the relationship, you've shifted the dynamic early, because they got now you almost placed a bit of confusion and curiosity in them. I was like, but ballet, I mean, we were all, it blows the mind. And I know it sounds like something that can be quite pedantic, but actually it was so simple. And he was just sat there going, yeah, I've never thought of it like that. I was like, see? So even the person trying to create the engagement can often forget to engage. Really interesting. We want to engage with people, but we don't actually do the engaging. And what does it take for me to engage with a group of people from the local community, from inner city urban Birmingham, who are prone to gang violence and territorial warfare, and you want them to come to an opera show, or you want them to come to a ballet, or you want them to come and see a piece of contemporary dance or a piece of theatre that is the classic one is Romeo and Juliet. Well, why don't we take Romeo and Juliet and completely deconstruct it and make it about a lesbian relationship where one of the partners is black and the other one's partner is white, and their father's a policeman? Now we have something that is very present. Now we have, and it's, you know, it's still Romeo, it's still Juliet, it's still Benvolio, it's still those guys, but it now is shaped in that's a George Floyd moment, that is. Guys, we need to come and watch this thing. It's a George Floyd thing. And all of a sudden, and then whilst you're doing that, you build your campaign around that. So you have your conversations with people that go, did you know that this theme exists here? And you shape this thing. So the show is only 10% of anything. Because we know the show's going to be good, because we're going to get brilliant performers in who are going to tell the story, follow the narrative, blah, 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 blah. That's fantastic. But actually, the other 90% should be investment in the engaging of the audiences that you struggle to engage with. And I feel like sometimes we put so much into marketing, but we don't actually know who we're marketing to. So we blanket market. And it sounds...
It's like neutral marketing.
Yeah. Let's just market, and then 22 weeks before the show, you're kind of like, oh, there haven't been many black people that have bought tickets, so now we need to get the tail end of the budget. Let's see if we can target. Wrong way to do it. Flip it on its head. Who is the engaging target audience that we're looking to get hold of? How can we take that and take it from off the theater, out of the after stage, and put it in one of the community centers that's got graffiti all over the walls? And, you know, Romeo's a bit of a rebel now. Instead of him being a swordsman, he's a gunman. Or you see, playing with those things. And again, it goes back to creative responses to issues we find in the creative industries. Now you're going to get people's respect, not because you're white, black, Chinese, Asian, whatever it is, because you're a creative first. Yo, that's dope. That is. Do you see what I mean?
Really enjoying your different layers of theatrical, like all these like layers of drama that you're explaining here, like with Costa, with then the reimaginings. It's really nice to hear your medium, your disciplines coming through in that.
Can you tell?
Totally. So we should think about wrapping up, but Dries, I'm just wondering, because we've both been speaking quite a lot just now, if there's anything that resonates for you.
Yeah, I have to say that I myself had an art practice 10 years ago or something like this. And I'm still very close, like also as artistic direction, very close, following our artists as a dramaturg and a lot of things. And somehow it was very inspiring, because it's indeed something, especially during the pandemic, which is, I mean, the last year, I've never been so far from a stage and from actually art practice and being not in conversation, but really working with artists as last year, because it was so much about problem solving and mediating and planning and all the difficult things that you have to do during the pandemic. So it's super inspiring to hear indeed, and to because it's so easy to forget indeed that we are not we're not running a shoe factory. Not against anything against shoe factories. Also, we actually have a lot of knowledge, and we are part of a super inspirational and amazing scene and industry, and somehow it's indeed true that with a lot of institutions, and also I see it happening here in my institution too much indeed, that we are disconnected from the actual resource that we have so close by. And it's indeed something that's really inspiring to hear in your testimonies and in your examples, is that we indeed have to, it's indeed the solution is so close, and still we often indeed to what you were also saying, as in why paying 600 pounds. Is it? I guess 600 pounds. Kind of formation from kind of management schools. If our resources are so close, we don't have to always go so far. And also, we have so much strength and resources so close by. So let's indeed focus on them first, because the answers might be closer than we think.
Yeah, and I think there's something that then connects to sustainability, isn't there? Like, and a local focus, and was it think global, act local? You know, that, you know, how do we start? How do we take care of, make the health of the thing that's most immediate? Use what we've got first, and yeah. I just want to conclude with saying, not that I have to conclude, but there is something around this fear. And I think there is something also around, much as we need, I feel as strongly, very slowly, and or to believe or commit to that slowness, and that I'm not the only one. I'm one of many contributing to this. And then beyond me and beyond me, and generations beyond. But as well, there is an urgency, because the arts are in such a dangerous and precarious place, and with so many cuts happening. I don't know whether it's the same in Belgium, but you know, there's just been this announcement around 50% cuts to arts subjects in higher education here, which is detrimental to the industry, unless alternative ways of training and existing and becoming artists also get kind of heralded, because also there's lots of problems around the HE system itself. But anyway, point being that as cuts are happening, we might not have the organizations we're in, you know, in a few years. They might not exist, you know, there's going to be slimmer and slimmer pickings, you know. So again, that makes me think about fear and being fearful of taking action and doing what we're doing. But also maybe even bigger thinking is needed around alternative ways. And if these organizations get demolished, how do we build something else? What is, you know, how do we start again, you know, again with what we have though. But okay, well, thank you everyone, and for also helping to co-create a space where I felt that we could listen and talk a bit.
Yeah, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you, guys.
Indeed. It was very, thanks for indeed creating a space where there was not so much fear, but a lot of love and a lot of place to actually ask questions without having the answers always ready. I think this was very, very inspirational for me. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.